The Trump administration's Border Patrol commander, who was responsible for some of the most shocking tactics that we have seen used as part of the immigration crackdown happening across the country right now, was caught lying in a recent court deposition about how and when he uses use of force, like tear gassing entire neighborhoods.
You want to see what real independent journalism funded by the people for the people looks like?
You ever heard a story like this in America?
You're looking at it.
Congratulations for always being somewhere where mainstream media is not.
Flint, Michigan.
See you in Nevada.
Thanks to people like you, we can get the truth. Corporate media, they've been lying to us for years, and you go straight to the people.
You are the man. I'm glad you're here.
For as low as 16 cents a day, you'll keep us on the ground, covering the important stories the corporate media covers up.
JT Cestkowski for Status Coup. Border Patrol Commander Gregory Bovino has been leading Operation Midway Blitz in Chicago and Operation Charlotte's Web in Charlotte, North Carolina, and will reportedly next be going to New Orleans, and was also responsible for some of the immigration crackdowns that we saw in Los Angeles. As part of the Chicago raids that we reported on extensively while we were on the ground there for 2 months, Gregory Bovino came under a lot of fire for how frequently his agents used chemical munitions. That means tear gas, pepper balls, and other less, quote unquote, less lethal forms of force, like, say, rubber bullets, in some of these communities where they were carrying out these blanket raids where they were just grabbing anybody, profiling based on the color of their skin or the job that people were doing or where they happened to be standing on the street. One of those incidents was in Little Village. That is a neighborhood, a predominantly Hispanic neighborhood in Chicago, where while they were out there conducting their operations, a group of protesters came together and called on these Border Patrol agents largely and other Department of Homeland Security agents to leave the neighborhood. And even though there was a court order that barred Greg Bovino and the other agents there in Chicago from using tear gas in neighborhoods unless under very specific circumstances, he still did this.
We're citizens, fucking terrorizers, traffickers, get the fuck out! Where is my people?
So that video shows Greg Bovino throwing one of 2 tear gas canisters that he threw during that late October incident in Little Village. Now, Greg Bovino claimed during this recent deposition that happened earlier this month that he threw those tear gas canisters in response to being hit with a rock. Not only did he claim that he was hit by the rock, but he claimed that there was video evidence backing up that claim. So the lawyers who were questioning him asked if they could have a copy of that video. Greg Bovino and the attorneys for the government agreed. So the next day, when Greg Bovino comes back in for further questioning and to share a copy of that video, he begins with an admission. He says, "I'd like to take a moment to correct some prior testimony." This is Greg Bovino talking. "I believe that I was mistaken. The white rock was thrown at me, but that was after. That was after I deployed less lethal means in chemical munitions." He's talking about tear gas canisters, the 2 tear gas canisters he deployed. "I was mixed up with several other objects in a very chaotic environment and other objects that were thrown at me. And I confused that white rock with other objects like water bottles and fireworks and many other things that were happening at the time. So I want to correct that." So that just goes to show the exaggeration and the after-the-fact justification that the Trump administration has been doing, not only in Chicago, but in cities across the country, where they need to make themselves look like the victim in all of these circumstances. So it can't just be that federal agents are deploying tear gas willy-nilly, as we have seen ourselves in our on-the-ground reporting in Chicago. No, it needs to be that a rock was thrown at them first, when in reality, what comes out when they're actually asked to produce video evidence? Oh, actually, that story falls apart, and it was the DHS agents who were instigating and who were escalating the force and the violence out there. And the crowd, after being hit with chemical weapons, then maybe responds and throws Iraq in response. But it just goes to show how unreliable the Trump administration has been in terms of its narratives that it has been spinning in not only this instance, but in other instances of immigration raids and use of force in Chicago and across the country. And all of this playing the victim and the exaggerating and the lying about what is happening in all of these incidents goes to serve a greater harm that is being rendered on communities like Chicago and cities across the country right now. And that is this deportation agenda. Deploying the tear gas is just a way of imposing its will, the Trump administration's will, on these cities. In the case of Greg Bovino, he kind of said the quiet part out loud in his first day of depositions when he took issue with the judge's order that barred that use of force and required the Trump administration to have at least some degree of oversight by the courts as to how it was conducting itself in that city. This is what he said. The lawyer asked him, is there any respect in which the injunctions, meaning, and then corrects himself, the temporary restraining orders issued by Judge Ellis, the judge in this case, has hindered or impaired the work of Operation Midway Blitz? Bovino says yes. The lawyer says, in what ways? There were some orders there to appear in front of Judge Ellis. That denigrates the mission, the time that I can spend on mission that I would otherwise be meeting with the judge. Same thing with the other orders that take people out of the field instead of doing the valuable work of taking the vile criminals that we apprehend by the hundreds every week. And you know, every time that we're answering a question or meeting with a judge is time away from that all-encompassing important work that's not been done before, especially in light of the millions of illegal aliens that were allowed to pour across the border, and many of whom have ended up here in Chicago, including child rapists, terrorists, murderers, aggravated felons, and those types of individuals, again, that we apprehend by the thousands now. We're well over 3,000 now. So anything that takes away from the all-important mission of apprehending individuals that are allowed to roam free with impunity on the streets of Chicago on a daily basis does take away from that. Bovino is lying again, or at least being very misleading. He is claiming that they have arrested some 3,000 people at that time of when the deposition was taken. All reporting suggests that that is true. But what he tries to do is to say that all of those thousands are, I think some of the ones he said are murderers or child rapists, et cetera, when by all of the indications that we have from the Trump administration itself, when it actually has to pony up in court and say how many of these people are in any way have a criminal history behind them, we get an answer of dozens, not hundreds, not thousands. The Trump administration recently got a court order to release hundreds of people who were being held, who were arrested without a warrant, and being held inside of federal custody. They had to be given the opportunity to bond out, but the Trump administration was allowed to argue for some of those people to remain in federal custody and not be given the opportunity of bond if they could demonstrate that they had some sort of criminal record. And at first, the Trump administration could only point to about 16 or so that did have a criminal record. That number has since gone up by several dozen, but still came far, far from indicating that it was anywhere near the hundreds or thousands that the Trump administration has been rounding up in Chicago. From what we saw on the ground, from reporting ourselves on the street, we saw that the Trump administration was really targeting day laborers, food cart vendors, people who just happened to be waiting at the bus stop at the wrong time when immigration agents happened to be driving down the street. They were targeting based on the color of people's skin or the neighborhood that they happened to be standing in and living in at that time. And for a lot of people who got picked up, it was just bad luck. And these were people who were working here, trying to provide for their families, and their families are left now picking up the pieces. In Charlotte, North Carolina, it was recently reported that the Trump administration, of the folks, of the several hundred that they picked up, of people that they picked up in Charlotte, perhaps only as many as a third or even less than that had any kind of criminal history. We can tell you these truths. We can be this direct about it because we are only beholden to you, our viewers. If you want to help keep us editorially independent, please go to statuscoup.com/join. For as low as $5 a month or 16 cents a day, you make sure that truly independent media continues to report on the abuses that are being carried out in your name and using your money right now.